Welcome to the Connect with BMC Helix ITSM webinar series. During today's event, you'll be able to ask questions of our panelists. The questions and answers, along with today's broadcast, will be published to our YouTube channel. Today's topic is approval architecture and troubleshooting. Adam Lawson and Ravi Dubey will take us through this content. Over to you, Adam.
Thanks, Greg. My name's Adam. I work with the BMC Remedy Helix support team, and I've been working with Remedy products now for about 6 years, and I've been working for BMC for about 3 years. Myself and Ravi Dubey will be leading this webinar and showing you around the approval server and some of the features of it. We're going to start with a quick overview of everything, then we're going to go into the approval server architecture and components, and then we're going to transition into the change management and approval server and how that works together, and then troubleshooting, and then references. So starting with our overview here, approval server is an automating signature-driven process. It is integrated with ITSM applications. It handles statuses and notifications. But today we're going to focus on reviewing the architecture and some of the components that go along with that, as well as the change management application and how it integrates with the approval server. And hopefully that'll help give some insight so that way you can reflect on it in your environment as well. Approval server has several different capabilities. It is a Remedy application that manages approvals for ITSM applications, asset management, change management, knowledge management, service request management, and digital workplace. It handles notifications of statuses. It enforces predefined rules and is included with AR server installations. This is a brief diagram of the architecture of how approvals might work. Those of you that are familiar with the standard Remedy Helix architecture with the presentation, application, and database layers, this should seem pretty familiar to you. The only thing that you're going to see that's added to this is the plugin server, where the preview plugin runs, and the server group coordinator. So this is just to give you a high-level view. Due to time, we're not going to go into it in too much of a detail, but this helps visualize some of the architecture that you might see. So one of the key things, though, with approvals that you can actually play with and look at and is really important is what we call the three-way join form. So every application that interacts with approvals has what we call a three-way join form. In this case, you have two. We have service request management and change management, and it is the join form name is SRM request AP detail signature or CHG change AP detail signature. Those two forms are what allow the application change management, service request management, to start the approval process, and it's what allows approval server to update the statuses as the approvals move along. These three-way joins are always between the parent form, like the diagram shows, CHG infrastructure change, and then the AP detail signature form, which is also a join. This is why it's called a three-way join, because you're joining that first primary form along with a join form for approval server. One thing to keep in mind before we go too much further is if you ever do have problems with approval server, there's definitely some logs that you have to get. The first is your API filter SQL logs, your workflow logs. Most people should be familiar in how to collect those. It is highly advised that you aggregate those to the same log file for ease of following. You'll also need the plugin server debug log. This is really important in versions 21.02 and earlier, because approval server is in the plugin server. We'll talk more about that here in just a minute, but you will need that plugin server debug log. And a key note here is it's whatever plugin server that the plugin is running on. If you have any questions about that, you can speak with whoever is your architect for your environment. And then you're also going to need your approval server debug log. Now, there's a knowledge article there for you to enable that. It's really easy to enable. It's just a setting, a centralized configuration. One thing that's not on this, though, that you will also need is your server group log. You'll enable that with your API filter SQL log. It's really important to get that so that way you can review the signaling. One other key thing before we move on is when you get these logs, you're going to have to get the logs from both the server you're submitting the request on, the server group coordinator, and the server that is running approvals. Now, if you're in a single server environment, then obviously it's only one server. But as you expand, you might have to get multiple servers worth of logs. So it's important probably to turn on all your logs in the whole environment, capture the problem or capture whatever workflow you want, and then you can go backwards to figure out what servers you actually need to review. Some improvements in 2102 and beyond, because Approval Server is one of our most developed components in the Remedy and Helix suite, is we now have integrated it into AR Server. Just like we talked about previously, you'd have to get the plugin server debug logs. That's no longer needed because it is integrated into AR Server as of 2102. So that means there's no plugin involved. What that really does is it provides greater stability and reduced latency. So it just makes it a better product overall. Now we're going to see a demo of the approval server components. All right, so the first thing we're going to want to talk about is the approval definitions themselves. And before we really get into the system and start looking at things, we want to really quickly touch base on that. The definition is just a group of objects, processes, rules, notifications, roles, mappings, things like that, that make up all the logic that needs to take place for an approval to execute correctly. Some of the key things are processes, rules, notifications, and roles. The processes define any routing of an approval request. It's kind of used as a framework for all other objects. The rules define how an approval request is actually processed. Usually there are many rules per process. And then notifications identifies when a notification needs to be sent, and roles determines who has permissions to view, approve, reject, and all those things. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to log into the mid-tier with an account with administrator permissions. I'm going to use app admin, and we're going to go ahead and log in with them. And then on the home page, we're going to click the applications flyout, quick links, approval administration console. Once you get there, it has everything you need right here at the beginning. You have the processes tab, which is where we're going to start. And to look at any of the processes, and you can see there's 38 here, you just click on one and you click view. And it'll open up a new window, and you'll then be able to see several of the different attributes that go into making the object of the process itself. Some of the key things, we're not going to go over everything verbatim, is the form. It tells us what form this is associated with. The type, parent, child, level, ad hoc, rule base. We'll go over each of those a little bit more later. Whether or not this can be reassigned. Can you reassign your approval request? Or does it have to go to the person it was meant to go to? Another one that's kind of important is if multiple approvers, do all people have to sign? Just one? Those are different things that people might choose. Validate approvers and require passwords is another one that a lot of people like to change. And validating the approvers requires them to be revalidated against the system. And requiring password requires them to they have to type their password in again, which forces them to actually think about whether or not you're wanting to approve or reject the request. It's kind of an extra step. Another tab here that's kind of important is the configuration tab, which allows you to set process intervals. So I can say a signature has to be done within 8 hours, or maybe it has to be done within 8 days. Another example would be the rejection justification, where you can say yes or no. You have to give a justification for your rejection. Once you're done looking at this or modifying this, you can click close. And I'm going to go and close this and leave it. I don't need to save the request because I'm not making any changes. And it'll bring you right back to the approval administration console. The next thing we're going to look at here is the rules tab. And the rules tab is going to, you can see it has 323 different entries listed. Now that's a lot to go through. To make this a little bit easier, you can see the show for processes drop down. And I can choose which process, and we'll see that there's only 19 rules that relate to that process. This really helps manage the objects that you have here. We're going to go ahead and we're going to choose one for a Get Next Approver. And I'm going to go ahead and view that just like before, and it'll open up in a new window. And you can see the for process. It tells us which process this rule is going to be assigned to. We also see the rule type. There are several different rule types here, as you can see. Some of the important ones are auto approve, where an automatic approval will occur. Get next approver is another good one. Approval process done is another one that's really important. That's where you define the actions taken when the approval process is done. Another one is Get Authority. Get Authority is another one where it gathers information about the current approver. The Completion Rule is another one that we use a lot, and that's determine what to do and how to route the request once the approval process is complete. I'm not going to go over all of these. I'm not going to give examples, but these are some things that you can look at. Another thing that's really important is the order. What order do these rules execute in? Very important to get that correct as well, because then you might hit certain logical barriers. The status, this is something really important. You'll see here that this rule is actually inactive. So I can enable it or I can leave it inactive. Just because there's a rule there doesn't mean it's always in use. So that's something that you need to look at as well. And the run if qualification is the next thing that's kind of important. The run if qualification really kind of shows us when do I need to run this. And in this example, if this field is not null, then it's going to execute. So it's really important to know that. That's there. There's another field that shows up under certain scenarios where it's called the audit text. It'll appear just below here. The audit text field is used when you have an auto approval. For example, we'll switch it over here. And when you have an auto approval, you can say, I want this text to appear in the audit log. It's a really good feature if you do those auto approvals. I'm going to switch it back here to Get Next Approver. And then we're going to look at the Set Fields tab. The Set Fields tab has a couple things on it that's important as well. Number one is what form, but also on which server and the qualification. So these are important things. What is the qualification for setting the fields? And then you can also set field names and the values that go along with them. So that way you can change things as needed. A key thing might be changing the status of a request or something like that. Once again, I'm not going to save this because I don't want to make any changes, so I'm just going to close this, and it'll bring us back to the approval administration console. I'm going to go ahead and click on notifications as well, and then notifications, you can see we only have 2 here, and let's just look at the new approval one. And you can see that, once again, you have your process name, so that way it's assigned to a process, whether or not it's active or inactive, and what notification action. There's a drop-down list here, notify on rejection, you can notify on an error, and all kinds of other things. New signature is usually one that's really popular because you want to let people know. Additional conditions, you can have a certain qualification there. That very well may be important for some options. For example, only notify when it's George or Bob or whoever. Those are simple examples, but you can build on that as needed. One thing we want to talk about too is the Details tab. The Details tab has this method where you can determine whether or not it goes in workflow, or an email, or an alert. We almost always use workflow because that will allow it to happen organically. And then you have this send to where you can notify a list, or you can specify individuals based on a field. We're going to leave this at notify list. And you also have this message field here where you can kind of customize the message that's sent to the individual. Where you can kind of customize the message that's sent to the individual. So once again, I'm not going to make any changes, so we're going to close this, and it's going to bring us back to the Approval Administration console. The next thing we really want to talk about is the role. Now, the roles are kind of important here, and one thing I want to make clear is this is not something that you necessarily change yourself here. You do this a little bit indirectly, but I want to look at one of the roles real quick. And you can see where you can determine if multiple approvers, does one sign, do all need to sign, status, whether or not it's an active or inactive role, and the member list, which just gives you a list of all the people that are associated with this. I'm going to close this, and here's the reason why you don't want to change these things here. I'm actually going to go ahead and let's open up the CTM people form. And since this is just sample data, I'm going to go ahead and pull everybody up. And let's look at Bob Baxter. Let's go back here and look. You can see that Bob is a part of this role. And it's a support group 009, and he's a problem manager. Now, follow along with me here. We're going to go to support groups. He's a part of the back office support group. So since it's the only one, I know that that's the 009. It makes this kind of easy. I can update the support group roles. And I'm going to actually go ahead and delete him from problem coordinator. And then I'm going to close this. I'm going to refresh this page so that way that gets refreshed. I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to refresh this as well. And you notice that Bob goes away and that whole role goes away. That's because when you make changes on your support groups, it automatically reflects in your administration console for Approval Server. So that's what I meant when I said you don't directly make changes to your roles from the administration console. So that's something you might want to keep in mind. Now, since this is sample data, I want to kind of give this back to Bob here. He was the problem coordinator. I'm going to go ahead and close that, refresh this once again, and come back over here and refresh, and you'll see that it re-adds this support group as well as it goes ahead and assigns Bob to this. I can do this with Alan and Mary and add them as problem managers as well, which will allow them to do these things, and it'll just append them to that member list as needed. Last thing I want to go over before we move on is these approval definitions. It's important to know that BMC ships these out of the box in a certain way, and making changes to these, it's not supported by BMC. This is something you need to test, and you need to double check with your work, because making some of these changes can really impact how approvals work. So double check any changes you might make. If you want to add, like we mentioned, you want to add a password verification. Make sure that it doesn't impact your authentication source directly. So that's just one example of things you just want to double check while you're doing these. This concludes my demo, and now hand over to Ravi.
Thank you, Adam. Hello, everyone. My name is Ravi Dubey, and I'm Lead Technical Analyst at BMC. In coming slides, we'll be talking about Helix Change Management Application, how it integrates with AR System Approval Engine, and various out-of-the-box configuration steps. So what is BMC Helix Change Management Application? It's an application which provides a system of planning, scheduling, implementing, and tracking change that needs to be completed within the organization. In change management application, administrators can define an approval process in which a series of people must review and approve a proposed change request. The BMC change management application is already installed with default approval integration, and it's configurable and customizable for business needs. There are various stages when a change request is submitted and it's closed. The first stage is initiate stage. Here, support staff submits a change request, and based on approval configuration set up for this stage, change is approved or rejected by approver. Next stage is review and authorize stage. In this stage, change coordinator fulfills some of the information like impact, risk assessment, priority, etc., and send change request for approval only if it is configured for this stage. Next stage is plan and schedule. Here, change coordinator plan for technical implementation steps, backout plan, etc., and send change request for approval. Again, only if it is configured for this stage. Next stage is implementation stage. Here, change coordinator and task owners execute the steps or task and mark change completed. Next stage is closed stage. If an approval is configured for this stage, approver reviews the change execution steps and record approval, which concludes the change status lifecycle. Let's take a look on out-of-the-box approval process types for change management application. Ad hoc approval process type. This process type provides routing authority to each approver without requiring the administrators to create approver mapping for every individual or group. The ad hoc approval process is used in the no impact business approval phase with the change management as the approver. Next is label approval process type. This process type associates individual approvers or group of approvers which impacted areas or configuration items or other additional qualifications. Parent-child approval process type uses the request for manager as the approver. If we configure an approval process that includes the change management chain process, it uses the requested for manager as the approver. If the requested for fields are not filled on the change form under the requester tab, the approval server bypass the change management chain process. Let's also review out-of-the-box approval processes for change management approval application. Review phase. In this phase, process is named as change label CIA review and its label approval process type. This label approval process occurs when the change reaches the review phase. Business phase. In this phase, process is named as change label CIA business and its label approval process type. This label approval process occurs when the change reaches the business approval phase. Implementation phase. In this phase, process is named as change label CIA implementation, and it's also a label approval process type. This label approval process occurs when the change reaches the implementation approval phase. Close down phase. In this phase, process is named as change label CIA close down approval and its label approval process type. This label approval process occurs when the change reaches the close down approval phase. There are different types of approval mapping in change management module. For example, individual approval mapping. This type is used to map an individual approver. One can select any individual who has a record in the people form. It is not necessary to select a person with the infrastructure change approval functional role. Group approval mapping. This type is used to map support group to work with change management approval. For example, user Mary Mon is a member of the service desk support group. and C has the infrastructure change approver functional role. If a change request requires group approval, anyone in the service desk support group must approve the request before it moves to the next stage. Inherent group role approval mapping. The inherent group role mapping type lets you select a group specified on the change form to be the approval group. For example, change manager group. The functional role menu lets you select a functional role for the approval. Another example, infrastructure change manager. These role creates individual approval entries for all the people who have that functional role. Individual group based on CI role based approval mapping. This mapping type is used to map individuals or support groups, which is related to a CI, to become approvers when the CI is related to a change request. The approvers are allowed based on the relationship of their role with the CI, which is approved by, managed by, created by, owned by, supported by, and used by. Let's take a look on multiple approval label flow diagram. Imagine a use case where first label of approval is provided by manager, and then only director approval can be attached as a next label approver. Therefore, manager approval is considered as label 1. Director approval is considered as label 2. This flow diagram demonstrates approval engine steps in such scenarios. There are 3 key steps required to configure change management approval. First is configure change process flow. The process flow data dictates the state transition of the change request within the different stages of the standard process flow. Second step is configure approval process. BMC change management ships with the default approval process designed out of the box for global use. These processes specify which status occurs next if a request is approved or rejected, or if no approvers are defined. Third step is configure approval mapping. The approval mapping defines the individual and group approvers for each approval phase based on Change Management Approval Administration Console. This console is available via quick links in the mid-tier application. For detailed information, one can check change management documentation in configuration after installation section. Approval Administrator uses this screen to review existing or create new approval process, rule, notification, etc. We will see more details in the coming demo. Let's take a demo on what we have discussed in previous slides. First, we'll review change process flow configuration. In the mid-tier application, navigate to Administrator Console, Application Administration Console. Go to Custom Configuration, Change Management, Advanced Option, Process Flow Configuration. Search for the default company global. The standard process is out of the box process flow name. In this table, process status lifecycle is defined. It starts from initiate stage, where the change status would be draft. The next stage would be initiate, and next change request status would be request for authorization. It continues its life cycle until it reaches to the closed status. One can edit, skip, or delete the status as per the business requirement. Now let's take a look on the approval process configuration. From Application menu, navigate to Administrator Console, Application Administration Console, Go to Foundation, Advanced option, Approval Process Configuration. Let's search for the out-of-the-box configuration, Change Request Management Application, and company is global, which is out-of-the-box configuration. There are various approval processes defined, and we'll walk through each of them. The first process is review. As you can see, this is defined for the company global. The process name is change label CIA review, and process type is label. Click on the status flow tab. As you see, the change process flow is a standard process. If you recall, this is the standard process we just talked about. This field provides the status transition, which is similar as we saw on the other screen. This process starts when the change request status reaches to request for authorization. If the change is approved, this process automatically moves the change request status to request for change. If the change request is rejected, the status is automatically moved to rejected. If there is no approver configured, this process automatically moves the change request status to request for change. These settings can be changed as per the business requirement. Moving to the next configuration. This is business approval with no impact. As you can see, this is change ad hoc process and not a label process. This process starts when the change request is request for change. If it is approved, it directly moves to the schedule status, bypassing request for change, planning in progress, and schedule for review stays. If this change request is rejected, the status is moved to rejected. If there is no approver, then also it moves to schedule. Additional qualification tab. As you can see, this qualifies for those changes where change timing class is selected as no impact. Moving to the next configuration, business approval. As you can see, this is the label approval, and the process name, it is tagged with change label CIA business. This also follows with the standard process flow. It starts when the change request status is request for change. If the change is approved, the request status moves to planning in progress. If change is rejected, the status is changed to rejected. In case there is no approver found, the change status moves to planning in progress. All these status is configurable and it can be updated based on the business requirement. Implementation approval. The process name here is change label CIA implementation. It's a label process. It also follows the standard process. It starts when the change request status is scheduled for approval. Once the change is approved, the change request moves to schedule status. If it is rejected, the status is rejected. If there is no approver configured, the change request status moves to schedule. Based on the business requirement, further categorization can be done for these fields. Close down approval. This approval is tagged with the process name change label CIA close down. This is also a label approval. It starts when the change request status reaches to completed status and the status region is final review required. Once the change is approved, the status is automatically moved to completed and the status region is final review complete. If the change request is rejected, the status is moved to rejected status. If there is no approver found, the change status is completed and the status region becomes final review complete. This concludes approval process configuration review for global data. Now we'll move to approval mapping. Navigate to Application menu, Administration Console, Application Administration Console, Change Management, Approval, Approval Mapping. On this screen, Change Administrators creates the approval as per the business requirement. Let's take a look on existing approval mapping I have created for this demo purpose. I will select the application change, company global. I have created 3 sample mappings. Let's take a look on the review. This approval mapping is for individual. The approver name is Paul. The assignment availability for Paul is yes. The company is global, and the phase name is review. These fields can be configured as per the business requirement. I haven't configured this one for the demo purpose. The next approval I have configured is for implementation approval. And this is a group approval. Support company Colbro service, IT support, back office support. The assignment availability for this group is yes. This is a global company, and the phase is implementation approval. I did not configure any of this data. The third one is close down approval. This one is inherent group role configuration, where the inherent group would be change manager group, and functional role would be infrastructure change manager. The company is global, and the phase name is close down approval. Now let's take a look on sample change request. I have created a change request, which is in draft mode. I will proceed and move the change request to next stage. As you see, the change request has moved to next stage. The first level of approval, Paul, is attached. You go back to approval mapping. Paul is configured for review phase, and the change request is correctly showing the approver. Let's approve. Once we approve, the change request moves to the next stage, which is request for change. We see there is no approver. Then the change request automatically moves to planning in progress. We'll move to next stage. We'll provide some of the required data. We'll fill the schedule start date, end date, save the change request. Next stage. The change request moved to schedule for approval, and current approval phase is implementation approval. It has automatically added approver Alan. Let's go back to the approval mapping. For the implementation approval, we have configured it's a group-based approval for company Colbro, the organization IT support, and the support group name is back office support. Now let's take a look on Alan profile. Alan is member of back office support, and he is having infrastructure change manager functional role for this group. So this approval is correctly attached. We'll click on approve. Change request status is schedule. We'll move to implementation in progress. We'll move to next stage. The change request status is completed and status region is final review required. At this time, the approver test one is attached. Let's go back to approval mapping. Closed down approval, it says it's approval configured for inherent group role, where inherent group would be change manager group, and the functional role it is looking for infrastructure change manager. Let's take a look on user test 1 permissions. User test 1 is part of change management, and he's having functional role infrastructure change manager. The change request is assigned to change management group, and the change manager is test 1. So this approver is correct. We'll go ahead and approve it. This concludes approver mapping configuration. Now we'll take a look on approval administration console. Navigate to application menu, quick links, click on approval administration console. Here, we'll take a look for the change management processes. As we discussed in the earlier slides, these are the change processes: change ad hoc, change label CI/IA business, change label CI/IA close down, change label CI/IA implementation, change label CI/IA review. We'll take a look on a couple of processes and the rules associated with it. Let's take a look on change label CI/IA review. The process name is change label CI/IA review. It applies on form change infrastructure change. It's a label process. Once this process is applied on a change request, can that approver signature be reassigned? Yes. If approval success, there is no more approval required. If multiple approval, all has to sign. If approval is not found, do not generate an error. These are some of the common settings. Let's take a look on rules. There are 9 rules associated with this process. Let's take a look on a couple of them. Get next approver. The rule name is change label CI/IA review. Get next approver. It applies on change label CI/IA review process. While processing, it has a run if qualification, and this rule will only apply if this matches this qualification. Let's assume it passed, then it will set the next approver under the field G1D, and it will set the next label of that approver based on whatever approval sequence. Again, it pulls the data from the form change impact area CI association outer join based on these qualifications. Let's take a look on the other approver rule. Prep get next approver. It applies for the process change label CI review. The rule type is prep get next approver. If we click on this drop down, this tells how many rules comes out of the box with the approval engine. It has a run if qualification. Once approval engine matches this qualification and passed, then it looks for this particular form, matches this qualification, and it sets the data in this particular field. These are some basic configuration. Let's take a look on the one more process, implementation. As you can see, the process applies on change form. It is also a label process. It can also be reassigned. And if it doesn't find any approver, it should not generate an error. Let's move to the rules tab. It also have 9 entries, and you can see that these all are applied for this process implementation. Let's move to the notification tab. Notification tab is the change signature notification or the reassign notification. We can create different notifications based on the business requirement. For example, we put the notification name, we attach with this process. For example, we select review, and here we provide other details like what kind of notification we want to send, email, alert, or workflow based, and the message, the subject line, and the other details. If you take a look on existing signature approvals notifications, this is a workflow based, and it uses this template to send the email to change approvers. Role. This tab shows the data from a particular form AP role. The form AP role stores all the data for the group-based approval. The data is stored in this format. It starts with the group name, and then it starts with the role name, like cab assignee or cab manager. Cab assignee change coordinator, and cab manager is change manager. Moving to the next form, this section provides the data that these are the main form where approval engine is integrated. For example, approval is integrated with SRM request, SRD service request definition, RMS release, change infrastructure change, AST purchase, and these two are out of the box sample approval applications. Administrator console. Here one can define the super administrator, which can act as a super administrator in case a change request has to be approved from behind the scene. So if you see here, the super approver name will appear under the alternate signature. Alternate tab shows all the alternate approver defined in the system for any users. If you click on server settings here, this screen provides us information of how to enable the approval debug log. Here we have to click on approval debug mode. We provide the file name, and here we have to select all. This enables the debug mode log for the approval engine, which is very helpful while troubleshooting any issues. This concludes our demo. BMC also have a troubleshooting guide specifically for the approval server. It has information to help with approval, not processing slowly, how to handle unexpected behaviors with approval, and how to test approval. We are not going to go through these verbatim as they are detailed in the troubleshooting guide itself, but I do want to go over a few of more common scenarios. One of the common problem reported by many users is approver did not get attached with change request. This issue generally occurs due to incorrect or missing data configuration. Few of solution can be applied in this case as compare change request and approver mapping record on form approval mapping, which is also known as APR approver lookup, and ensure that it matches criteria like location, class, priority, etc. If it is an individual approver, ensure that the assignment availability is set to yes for mapping records on above form, approver mapping, or APR approver lookup. In case of support group approver, check if AP role form have a record for group which approver is associated with. Another common problem reported by many users is change request approval status is set to error. This issue generally occurs due to incorrect missing data configuration as well. For example, no approver is assigned, mapped, and the change process definition. Example, change label CII review has value yes set in the field retrieve first approver failed error. Update this value to no. This is the most common solution we applied for such issues. Another common problem reported by several users is email-based change approval doesn't work. This issue generally occurs due to incorrect missing data configuration. Few of the solution can be applied in this case as approver doesn't have email address in CTM people, or same email address is attached with multiple approver people ID in CTM people form. The original email which went out to approver, in email to field, multiple person name added. By design, each approver must receive unique email. Approvers are using Outlook app on iOS Android, which sends all the value in one line instead of separate line, thus approval engine unable to decode it. In this section, we have highlighted reference to key documentation. Approval server configuration checklist document, administration forms, forms to create and modify approval processes. These document references are very helpful to configure, administer, change management approval processes. At the end of session, I would like to highlight the key topics we discussed today. We reviewed AR approval server architecture and its component. We learned about change management application and various approval process type and out-of-the-box configuration, and how these configuration acts as a foundation to work with AR approval server. We also learned about troubleshooting common issues. This concludes our presentation. Thank you. Back to you, Greg.
Thank you. And now I'll take us through the self-help in contacting BMC. The YouTube channel where this webinar will be posted is listed here. It contains past webinars as well as a rich set of how-to videos. The Connect with BMC Helix ITSM and Remedy webinar schedule is available at this community's link. And the Hot Off the Press newsletter for trending information is available at this community's post. As always, contacting technical support via web, phone, email, and these social channels is available. At this time, that will conclude this webinar. Thank you for attending.